Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, a podcast for those living with the effects of prenatal alcohol exposure, their families and loved ones, and also anyone interested in learning more about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. I have a very special guest today, Miss Jessica Rutherford, who got her PhD in FASD and education, and she is currently the owner of the the animation curriculum. So I ran into Jessica on LinkedIn, and so if you guys aren't over there, it's a great platform. You can meet really, really cool people over on LinkedIn. So, but Jessica was recently over here in the States when she attended the Seattle conference. So why don't we start there? Jessica, was that your first like international FASD conference? How was that for you and what'd you think?
It was fantastic. It wasn't my first. I attended the Vancouver conference.
Okay.
I attended that twice, and I also attended the European FASD conference as well, all
Okay.
before COVID. So this was
Mhm.
my first post-COVID conference. So
Mhm.
first big in-person gathering that I had been to, and I know it was the first of the international FASD conferences
Mhm.
um, since it had been moved from Vancouver as well. So
Yeah.
it was so good to see so many people
Yeah.
and so many familiar faces, but also so many new faces. So during that period where everything had been quiet, everybody had been off in their own home countries
Yeah.
doing their work, to bring everybody back together and hear what was going on and what new projects were starting and everything.
Mhm.
I think there was over 500 people there. I want to say there might have been this 600 people there. So
Yeah.
it was a big conference.
Yeah.
Um, and there was people from all over the world.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it
I
was
was there
really
in
great.
spirit.
Yes, yeah, you were. You were.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really wonderful to be in person again and to be able to network.
Yeah.
And that's my thing with conferences.
Okay.
I really appreciate the opportunities to network with people.
Yeah. So you mentioned to me before we started recording that you had a poster there. So you had a display of your FASD animation curriculum.
Yeah.
What kind of reception did you get? How much interest in that did you get? And did you make any leads?
The posters, the posters were presented during a lunch break or two
Okay.
lunch breaks. So it was all very casual. We sort of stood by our posters, but with coffee in hand,
Hmm.
chatting to people as they passed. So I did
Hmm.
make a few leads there. I also spoke to a lot of people during all the other breaks and everything.
Yeah.
But what my poster was looking at all of the research behind my curriculum, my framework, which really was a very, very short summary of my entire doctorate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was sort of
That was a
those,
challenge, I bet, to
yeah,
summarize
absolutely.
all those years of work and onto a poster.
Yeah, it was so 8 years worth of work and 500 pages of thesis
Oh,
onto a poster.
yeah.
But from years ago, there is an art student and a graphic designer inside me who wanted to keep this poster um, very pleasing to the eye and
Mhm.
not stressful to read. So that made it even more challenging. But
Yeah.
the opportunity to speak to people and to explain really supports whatever was written on the poster, and
Yeah. Yeah.
really explain to people what it is that I'm doing now and why it's relevant and
Hmm.
what has evolved from this study, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get into it. So I'm not although I have been a professional student back in the day, I'm not on the education side of things. So some of what you say may be like a foreign language to me. So if you can, maybe help us understand how, well, let's start with your doctorate. What was your thesis, your theme, and did you manage to prove that point?
So that's another big question.
I'm good
So
at those.
yeah, my title was Animation-Based Learning for Individuals with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders. And what I wanted to look at was if a creative, hands-on approach to storytelling
Mhm.
could be an effective educational intervention for individuals with FASD or prenatally exposed to alcohol.
Okay.
And what I learned was that there is an awful lot of alignment between the two processes. So my background and my experience in filmmaking and using that process as a storytelling tool, and the intersection with what we know about how best to support learners with FASD and the best practice approaches to education and schooling, whatever that may look like.
Okay.
But what came about very quickly was how transferable this was. So whilst it made sense to me because I had this history in filmmaking and digital storytelling, those creative practices, and this knowledge of FASD, my experience of individuals working in that area, was who else would hold both of those sort of knowledge groups and how this could be transferable. So it would be great suggesting an approach, an educational intervention, but who else could apply it in the same way? So what a lot of my work then steered towards was how to make it transferable. So how to then share it around the globe, and how I would then approach handing over my framework to other people to deliver, to make sure that this reached as many people who could benefit from as possible. And what I learned very quickly was that the main experience of whoever was delivering it was to be within the area of working with individuals with FASD, not in filmmaking, not in creative practices, not in digital storytelling.
Okay.
And I don't want to take anything away from the expertise of those in that profession, but the experience of working with individuals with FASD and other neurodiversities was primary.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a whole training plan on how to equip, but not just equip them to do it, but equip them to feel confident in delivering this program. Because that's another thing. When you're working with children, not just with FASD, you're just working with children, you have to be confident in what you're delivering and know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You have to have eyes everywhere. So you can't be checking manuals all the time and worrying about instructions.
Right.
And so that became a big focus. And then I looked at the environment as well, and how those mainstream classrooms are generally not very suitable for individuals with FASD, but how we could use existing equipment, existing resources for filmmaking. Because I think when you consider filmmaking, a lot of people sort of, oh, this sounds like it's going to be expensive. You know, we're going to need expensive equipment and software, and I don't know how to use software, and all of those things were considered and eliminated.
Okay.
In a lot of cases.
So you've managed to enable the use of everyday technology, which is heads and shoulders above what it was even 10 years ago. Yeah.
Absolutely. So much of this can be done with an iPad, a simple Chromebook, a mobile phone, a webcam.
Okay.
Whatever we have access to, really.
Okay.
Make it accessible to almost any, I say almost any setting, because somebody at the Seattle conference asked me about a prison setting. I was like, might not be acceptable. We might have to do some work around there.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, accessible.
So I'm guessing they were thinking of like their GED program or even college curriculum for the prisoners.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but
So
it was very much brainstorming, so it was really interesting too.
Yeah.
to
So
share that.
tell me, I imagine that the environment, right, in classrooms in the UK, I'm guessing aren't too terribly different than the classrooms here in the US or anywhere else. Because this it is so crazy to me. This is truly, I have an international audience, which amazes me. Um, I'm tickled pink, but I imagine that it's, generally similar with a whole lot of kids, few educators, not nearly enough sound deadening material or sound insulation in the room. Lots of very noisy things, lights that hum and buzz and make kids want to
Mhm.
time themselves with the, vibrate, picking up those vibrations. Um, and just all the jostling of kids and just a smorgasbord of distraction, right? So how does animation provide an alternative?
We don't, we can't provide an alternative.
Okay.
The lights, the environment, um, will always be what they are.
Yeah.
What we do have is recommendations around the space that is used to deliver this program.
Okay.
More of an optimal space,
Yeah.
wherever possible, and just things to consider.
Okay.
Because the other thing, this program, it doesn't necessarily need to be delivered in schools. It doesn't necessarily need to be delivered by teachers.
Okay.
So if, for example, somebody was going to hire a community space to deliver this program and work with 2 or 3 young people from the community, just things to consider when they're looking at new spaces. I wish that we could make changes in schools.
I think a lot of us do.
Yeah, I wish we could all come together
Yeah.
To make those changes. But just things considering like the space. So
Mhm.
the animation curriculum is a 7-module program, and for each of the modules, there's a very, very clear list of what we need. And the considerations then are that anything that we don't need is removed,
Okay.
and remove whatever we can from the room,
Okay.
even to the point of removing tables and chairs,
Mhm.
because there are role play elements to this as we work through the program. And
Oh,
that I understand that that's not always feasible, and it
yeah.
will rarely be feasible, but the recommendations
Yeah.
are there.
Yeah.
So
So
we do what we can.
you piqued my excitement with the role play, because one of my favorite therapeutic modalities in my pre-California life, I was a therapist, is psychodrama.
Ooh,
So just, I was like, what? Role play?
yeah,
Which I never wanted to be called on to participate, but once I was in it, was really cool and really
yeah,
powerful. So,
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah.
can you share with us an example? Um, and I should have thought to ask you to bring some clips or something that we could share. I don't imagine you have anything loaded on your computer handy. Okay.
No.
So walk us through then. Paint us a picture of a typical project within one of those modules.
So as I said, the animation curriculum is a 7-module program. Each of the modules can be considered a standalone intervention, but really it is part of a wider program. Each have their own purpose, each have their own outcome. They do not have set durations. So we could deliver module 1 on Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, Friday morning. And we do that week after week after week until we're ready to move on.
Okay.
There is no time limit on these. It's when whoever is facilitating feels that we're ready to move on and that we've achieved what we were hoping to achieve from that module and that we were
Okay.
ready. So it's a building block
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah,
So we're
I
happy
like
with
that.
module 1.
I like that because that boosts confidence,
Mhm.
right? And it builds faith that things can be accomplished for the
Absolutely.
students. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
And
for the
it,
teachers.
yeah, yeah. And we take a group approach where
Mhm.
possible. It's shared task completion where
Okay.
everybody has their individual roles. So I was just speaking to somebody, and I used the example that if a student finds it very therapeutic to tear paper,
Mhm.
then during the creative production module 3, their role naturally is
To tear
to
paper.
tear paper. And we use that, we
Okay.
make that work. And that's just one example. So if somebody said to me, Jessica, we're really keen on using the animation curriculum. We have this group of students, this group of learners who we would like to, look at social skills.
Mm-hmm.
This is our focus. We want to focus on social skills. I would go away and write a version of the curriculum. So I've got my framework. I would write a version of the curriculum for them, give them all the supporting documentation, the training, everything. And so module 1 is all around story writing and script writing.
Okay.
So we would look at a story perhaps of a new student starting school and entering that classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And within that story, we consider what happens. So new student enters, teacher says this student's name is, so literally what would happen. But there's opportunity there to be discussing thoughts, feelings,
Mm-hmm.
emotions. Where appropriate, we can bring those in.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, we look at the script. So shared conversations. What might you say? What could you say? What do you think their response would be?
Okay.
And we can go back and forth. And we could do multiple examples of that. And that's why there is no set duration on each module, because there's
Right.
not really any end point.
Right.
It's
So
just when we're ready to move forward.
so this is a way that people can rehearse pro-social behaviors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And get that muscle memory going, by having
Absolutely.
done it. Yeah.
And so we have the conversations, we talk through it. Somebody will write it down, probably the facilitator, but write down the story, write down the script, but also role play it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll work through it. Ask the group, do you think that was the correct response? Do you think there's a more appropriate response? What do you think the friendly response? And all of these sorts of questions then come up.
Okay.
We move to creative production, storyboarding. I think a lot of people who work in the area of education would be familiar with social stories.
Mm-hmm.
And we storyboard, so we frame by frame, we work
Yeah.
out the actions, the thoughts, the conversation, and we plan that out. And another module then is to produce an animatic. And this is a really interesting, and this is more where the film process comes in.
Yeah.
Where we take a photograph of every one of those storyboard frames and we play them in a loop like a slideshow, just using your iPhoto
Right.
app or whatever it is. And it's the first time that the students see movement.
Yeah.
And that then allows us something from which we can record a narrative. So we then record the voices, record the sound, we record perhaps a voiceover.
Yeah.
We record the speech and then link the two together. So they're sort of the earlier production modules, and I'm just trying to give you an example of what they may look like, and where we bring in all of the strengths of the different students.
Mm-hmm.
The students are, so there's an approach to delivery of every session, and it provides a scaffolding around the students through which they are to develop their own learning.
Mm-hmm.
So we're giving them the tools, we're giving them the tasks, and we're putting this protective bubble around them to then sort of figure it out for themselves and figure out how they best learn.
Okay.
So there's lots of materials, there's lots of different things that can be done. And the beauty of animation and film production generally is that there's so many different ways that we can tell a story.
Yeah.
That we can use everybody's strengths in some way and get really creative with it.
Yeah.
And then we just piece them together.
So going back to that example, do you also come up with rehearsals for classroom members? Not just the new student, but the peers who
Yes,
are.
so within that example, we would look at
Mm.
the new student coming in, but then we could also discuss the teacher's response and what the teacher does. And what do you think would help this student settle in? What do you think the teacher should do to help this student settle in best? What could you do to help this student feel welcome in your classroom? And just spin that conversation in every way possible. And
I imagine
this very, very small example.
This could also be a very creative way of exploring individuals' sensory issues as well.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like, I don't want to sit directly underneath the light, for example. Right? Well, why? What happens? You know, and I feel the vibrations of that light, and it's distracting, right? So that is wonderful, because that would make everyone involved more aware. So do these animations, excuse me, I've got some post-nasal drip, change of seasons here. Oh, and my voice is coming and going. Interesting. So I sound a little froggy at the moment. My thought derailed. I had totally lost it. It's always something.
You were saying do the animations.
Oh, yes. Do you
Does that help?
share them with, the broader classroom, other than just the few students involved in the production?
Where and when possible and appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
it would be shared.
Mm-hmm.
Even to the point of hosting a screening event to invite parents to.
That would be awesome.
Wider community. And what I would really love to do with the next people that I work with, the next company or organization, school, whatever, is to connect with more local community groups to share that wider. And just see where that goes, because everywhere we go now, there's digital screens in doctors' waiting rooms, or at the supermarket, or the local mall, or all of these in the community spaces, where the screens everywhere are telling us something. So why not share something that's been produced locally that really presents the story, something important of the local community?
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. Now, obviously, you and I would both say, yes, every school needs this. But how would a teacher or a parent know if any particular child needs something like this curriculum?
I would say that whilst it was specifically designed, my framework is specifically designed for individuals with a FASD, to accommodate all of the variables and all the different challenges that we can see in an educational context. There is nobody that wouldn't benefit from connecting with it. And that's, to be honest, I believe it's just on an interest basis. So this is something that I would be interested in myself doing when I was a student. I was creative. And I appreciated different approaches to learning. But I have siblings who would not have appreciated and would not have benefited. So it's really an individual learning process. And it can be adapted. And I think any parent or teacher who thinks yeah, this sounds good. Sounds like something that I want to explore. This sounds like something that would engage my class. It would interest them. They would benefit from this process, this sort of long, non-linear,
Yeah.
creative approach to addressing a particular topic that's quite hard to, these more abstract concepts, quite hard to educate. Then come and have a conversation with me, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so what schools need to know and teachers need to know is that this is a extremely versatile program.
Mhm.
Now, do you have to tailor software to any particular problem, or do you have any general topics that can work anywhere?
Both.
Both. Okay.
I I have
Well, that's
I have
good, actually.
yeah, I have general topics, but really where the benefit lies is that a school comes to me and says, we are looking to focus on language skills. And I can go back with a few different proposals and say, what do you think would work best for your population of students?
Okay.
And I have a lot of ideas around each of the topics just from working in this area. So there's a lot of back and forth there. There's conversations. They might be looking for a lot of guidance from me or none at all. They might come with a very specific request of thinking of a foster parent, for example, of saying that we've got this individual child who's moving on to a long-term placement, and we're just looking at something creative to work through that transition process. More of a therapeutic approach than an educational approach.
Right.
That we can work with that, and we can
Okay.
take photos of that new placement. We can take photos of the new carers, and we can incorporate all of those into this process for that more therapeutic approach to the transition.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it can be as structured or not as somebody would like, and that's where
Yeah.
my experience would come in.
Yeah. So it sounds like your clientele could also include the mental health system. Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, I'm working on it, but the program hasn't been used in a therapeutic setting. So I am therefore not allowed to say it has therapeutic value, and I'm not a therapist, so I can't test that myself, unfortunately.
Right.
However, many people have said to me that there is therapeutic value to this.
I absolutely see that in
Mhm.
everything that you have described so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for somebody to apply it who would find it beneficial.
Right.
Yeah.
I wish I could be that person. But you touched a soft spot for me when bringing up, foster kids and transitions, because that absolutely is therapeutic, to do a transition well. Because in every field we have best practice, but the realities of life in our super speeded up world means that we rarely actually do those best practices, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay. So, anyway, to my audience, please forgive me for my scratchy throat. All right. So, how you, and I think in a previous conversation, we talked about you've worked with some schools here in the States, in the Midwest, if I remember correctly. Tell me a little bit about what kind of projects did they have you create for, and have you gotten any feedback yet on the success?
Those were the examples that I shared, actually. So
Okay.
I kind of cheated there.
All
Because
right.
they're two very real examples that are right at the forefront of my mind. in
Okay.
terms of social skills. And it wasn't the exact example of a new student coming to the classroom, but
Yeah.
social skills and language skills
Yeah.
were the main focuses there.
Okay.
And their student populations did not have any students with a diagnosis of FASD,
Hmm.
but they were in special education programs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And that actually was going to be part of my next question. Because in my book, Sip by Sip, I have a quote from some authors that did a study, Popova et al., where the authors say we should be grateful for the 99.99% of people with FASD who are not diagnosed. So our diagnostic rate is abysmal. And we well know that there is a minimum of one student in every classroom who's got FASD statistically, possibly a few, right? 2 or 3, especially post-COVID, when we have all the elevated drinking rate that we did not have before when most of the stats were gathered. And we know it's headed down that path because currently here in the States, we have 1 in 7 pregnancies being characterized by alcohol exposure.
Wow.
That's mind-boggling, right? But if you consider that almost all kids and adults with an FASD are either misdiagnosed or missed completely, there's a lot of kids in the gen ed population in schools that could benefit from the program.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the qualifiers for a student, to be kind of handpicked for your curriculum, without having the luxury of the diagnosis in hand?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
There is nothing. What any individual, student, young person, adult, older person, anybody, all they need is a trusted adult
Mm-hmm.
who wishes to facilitate this program.
Okay.
That's it. That's it. So it will only benefit anybody who engages with it.
Okay.
And that benefit will be on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Some may have a very small benefit. Some might get a lot more from it.
Yeah.
And that's not defined by whether or not they have FASD
Yeah.
or any other condition.
Right.
That,
Because, we know that as a species, we are neurodiverse. So there will be that spectrum of benefit.
absolutely.
So it sounds like what is needed is for the educator to have a sense of who each of their children are and to say to themselves, I'll bet Johnny would really benefit by this. Or I'll bet Susie could go so far if we did this.
Yeah.
And that's good enough to start advocating with their administrators about get this program.
Or use it with the whole classroom.
Okay.
The whole class. Let's not exclude or take out the students with additional needs for their additional support or whatever we call it. Keep everybody together and assign everybody roles suited to their strengths.
Okay.
And that's where I would work closely with the schools if they wanted me to.
Okay.
To sort of say, well, where is this student's role? Tearing paper. You'll have the natural director, you'll have the natural storyteller, you'll have the natural leader. But somebody's very important role, for example, tearing paper.
I love this. I mean, how did you even come up with this?
I have no idea.
It truly is so inspirational, right?
It's a really bizarre mix of what I learned through my undergraduate in computer sciences, digital special effects for film, into my master's, where I worked very closely with an animation therapist. I worked in a care centre where I first became aware of individuals with FASD. However, I was working in the marketing department. So it's just an accumulation of all of these different experiences and different opportunities to learn. And then I started my PhD. I started learning from all the literature. I hadn't got a clue what it was talking about. I really did not understand. So I went to work with CAMP, an FASD community that's just outside of Chicago. Week-long residential summer camp dedicated to those with FASD. And that I worked with them for 3 years. That experience taught me more than any book that I ever picked up, because that's the way I learned. I threw myself in a deep end. The literature made a little bit more sense afterwards, but not a whole lot.
So for those who learn by jumping into the deep end, right, where it's sink or swim, you evidently are swimming beautifully to have come out from those experiences. But I'm so curious, Jessica, what was it about that program where you were in the marketing department, and yet those residents with FASD touched you, touched your heart to the point where it shifted your entire career path?
It was, so I was somewhat aware of FASD, not very much at all. And then I was sat in the airport one night, and my supervisor from my master's, she was an animation therapist, she contacted me and said, applications are open, come and do a PhD with me. So I did, and I got accepted. And I wrote all my applications while I was away traveling Vietnam, and how I got accepted, I don't know. It was all done from my phone. I got accepted. And then I started exploring the idea of educational interventions using the animation process, looking at digital storytelling to work with students with additional needs. And my supervisor sent me away and said, you can't help everybody. You need to choose a condition. How we support them educationally looks different. Go away and write a paper on every disability and what that looks like in an educational context.
That's a lot of different papers.
I was furious. I was not happy about this task at all.
How many papers did you end up writing?
Not many. I wrote probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
And then somehow stumbled across those letters, FASD. And I got 2 or 3 sentences into my FASD paper, and I emailed, and I sent the most professional, angry email of my life. I said, I'm not doing this task anymore. This is the condition I'm focusing on. This is it. And I had to go in and meet with them and justify and explain what the literature looked like. And we continued. And 6 months later, they said, are you sure? I was part-time student, so 6 months wasn't actually that long. But they said, are you sure? And I said, you are not changing my mind on this one. Absolutely. And like, okay. Because you're looking to fill a gap in knowledge. We asked you to identify a gap in knowledge. What you came back to us with was the Grand Canyon. There is no knowledge. You cannot fill this gap with 1 PhD. This was 2015.
They're so right.
Yeah. And that just motivated me even more. They were trying to put me off. That just motivated me even more. And the more that I grew to learn about it, my mum had worked in special ed. My mum's a foster carer. My mum hadn't heard of FASD at that time. People I kept talking to, nothing.
So as you looked at that perspective, how many of your foster siblings started ringing bells in your memory as you learned? You're like, oh, that's so and so, that's so and so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
more I spoke to my mum was obviously remembering students that she'd worked with.
Yeah. So there's the personal connection.
Yeah. All those light bulb moments. And then
Yeah.
I got involved with the local community. I'm connected with parents here. I have a wonderful, wonderful babysitter who comes to help with my toddlers who has FASD. And camp was life-changing.
Yeah.
And I'm still connected with them and some of the families. And like it was, and that I think the parents' appreciation of anybody working specifically in the field of FASD, it's not something you could walk away from, and I don't think it's something they'd let you walk away from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've said that frequently. You know, you can learn about a lot of different conditions, but learning about FASD is life-changing. And once it takes hold of you, there's no going back. There's no unringing the bell with this one. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am so impressed and so grateful for what you've, taking on the Grand Canyon. And I'm so hopeful that what you have created will be one of the mechanisms by which we really change the world for the better.
I hope so.
There's a lot of movement in the community at this point where things are coming to fruition. Things are building at an escalated rate at this point. And I really think that what you've come up with is a part of that.
Thank you.
So
I really appreciate that. It's my pebble in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. How can people, and this podcast is mine, how can people reach you if they want to get your curriculum?
Just go to the website. It's www.theanimationcurriculum.com.
Okay.
And there's a contact button there. Alternatively, hello@theanimationcurriculum.com.
Okay.
Email, it will come straight to me. I'm on LinkedIn. As you mentioned, it's yeah, I'm on social media. And people might recognize me from my own podcast as well. So
you have a podcast too? That's right. You did mention that to me in our first conversation.
Yeah, we kind of had a podcast. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's dying a slow death, but it's sort of, it needs to be revived. But it is still on the internet. So people people in Seattle are like, oh, wait a minute, did you? Oh yeah, I did do that a few years ago. That
it's just a long time between seasons, right?
it's just a very extended break. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my hope is that at some point when the time is right, that will be revived.
Yes, I'm sure it will.
The more voices we have, the better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I've been delighted that you've been able to spend time with me today and to join in the Living with FASD family. So it's been my honor, and I hope that you keep us posted as far as if this episode, gets you in a few more places, and so that we can all, I'm a person of faith, so if you're in a couple places, then I'm going to be praying for its success in those places. So
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me and having this opportunity to discuss it all with you and share with your community and your listeners.
Yeah, it's been a joy to spend this time with you and get to learn more about your program. The animation curriculum, which is a brand new approach, everybody, to really tailored education that's going to make a difference, that builds upon students' individual strengths and in addressing challenges. So that's amazing. And that's a neurobehavioral approach basically, and which is the way that I take in my work with families. So bravo to you. And I can't believe we're at the end of another episode already. This time has just absolutely disappeared. I wanted to invite everybody again over to patreon.com/livingwithfasdpodcast. The community is free. It's a space where you can engage with one another and, with whatever you want to, preferably about the episodes. But it's a community space. And again, there's no cost to joining the community. However, if you would like to support, the paying for the expenses of the podcast, you can sign up for one-time gifts, or you could sign up for monthly support in, $5 a month, $10 a month, $15 a month, all of which is less than the cost of one cup of coffee each week. So I would be grateful for that, because all the programs that we use to bring this podcast to you do cost me money. So it will help cover those expenses and help me able to keep this going into my second year now. So I can't believe it. So I'm going to have to start doing season 2 real soon. So again, everybody have a great week. Thank you for taking time out of your week today listening, and join us next Monday for another episode of Living with FASD.